He almost hit the wall, twice in the same corner. That's not the headline you saw, but it's the headline that matters. Oscar Piastri walked away from Les Combes on lap 8 of the Belgian Grand Prix, believing he'd survive something the stewards refused to call anything at all. No penalty, no black and white flag, no further action, just silence, wrapped in a verdict that reads like a legal shrug. You've probably seen the headline already. Leclerc cleared, Piastri annoyed, moving on. That's the version they want you to scroll past. But stay with me, because the actual story isn't about who was right in that corner. It's about what the FIA just told every driver on the grid is now acceptable, and why that decision might matter a lot more in December than it does today. Before we open this file, do two things. Hit subscribe, because when the next steward's decision breaks the same way, you'll want the full pattern already mapped out. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Brazil, South Africa, the UK, the US, wherever you are, because this next part hits differently depending on how your favorite driver has been treated by this exact rulebook this season. Here's what happened, stripped of the spin. Piastri and Leclerc were fighting for position on the outside of Les Combes. Piastri had part of his car alongside Leclerc's Ferrari. Leclerc held his line, defended the position, and the two cars touched. Piastri's McLaren came away with floor damage. Leclerc drove off like nothing happened. Over the radio, Piastri didn't sound like a driver who'd lost a battle for position. He sounded like a driver who'd almost lost a race weekend entirely. Quote, "He didn't leave enough space. That could have been a massive crash. Not unfair, not he blocked me. Massive crash." Keep that phrase in mind because it comes back later, and it comes back in a place you won't expect. Race control looked at it. Race control moved on. No flag, no penalty, no warning. And that's when Piastri went from frustrated to something closer to alarmed, once he actually got to explain himself to the media afterward. Here's the quote that should have made more noise than it did. Piastri told Planet F1 and the rest of the paddock press, quote, "I was on the white line and got squeezed, and we were firstly very lucky not to have a bigger crash because we touched wheels at the start of the braking zone. I don't really know where I was supposed to go." Read that last line again. I don't really know where I was supposed to go. That is not a driver complaining about losing track position. That's a driver telling you, on the record, that the rulebook gave him nowhere to exist. And the FIA's answer to that was, no further action necessary. So let's follow the chain, because this is where it gets interesting. The stewards investigated this as a potential breach of Appendix L, Chapter 4, Article 2, Subsection D of the FIA International Sporting Code. That's the section that's supposed to protect a driver who's alongside another car from being forced off the track. It exists specifically for moments like this one, and here's the part that didn't make it into most of the coverage. The steward's own written verdict admitted Piastri had some overlap on Leclerc. Not none, some. But then it added a technical condition that Piastri's front axle wasn't fully ahead of Leclerc's front axle, and used that single measurement to conclude there was, quote, no possibility of Piastri completing the overtake. Which brings us to the actual question nobody's asking loudly enough. Since when did partial overlap plus contact equal automatically no case to answer? Because if that's the new standard, every defending driver on the grid just learned exactly how much room they're allowed to leave a rival, right down to the centimeter, and get away with it clean. Piastri seemed to understand exactly what he was watching happen. Quote, "If we think that is fine, it is one thing having touches like that, but even just the incentive of knowing that you can leave anyone the absolute bare minimum of space and get away with it, that's not the nicest place to be. That's not a driver venting about one Sunday. That's a driver naming an incentive structure. He's telling you that FIA didn't just make a call, they made a rule, out loud, in public, whether they meant to or not. Now hold that thought, because this is where the institution starts protecting itself. The steward's full explanation reads almost like a defense brief for Ferrari, not a neutral ruling. It states that Leclerc, quote, followed the racing line before the entry to turn 5 by moving slightly to the left to open up for turn 5, and side-to-side contact occurred between the two cars. Notice the phrasing, not Leclerc squeezed Piastri. Contact occurred, as if the two cars bumped into each other by accident of physics, with no driver making any decision at all. That's the sentence that should be making people uncomfortable. Because if a governing body can describe a driver actively narrowing the track ahead of a rival as simply contact occurred, then no incident this season is ever going to get called what it actually is, It'll just be described in careful, bloodless language until it disappears. Is this a pattern? Or is this just one race, one corner, one unlucky call? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you're on Piastri's side on this one, smash that like button because I want to see the real number, not just the algorithm's guess. Here's why this stops being a one-weekend story and starts being a championship story. Piastri finished that Belgian Grand Prix 5th. Leclerc finished second, 16 seconds ahead. Floor damage on a McLaren doesn't just cost position on one Sunday. It costs downforce, balance, and pace for the rest of the race distance. In a title fight that could come down to single-digit point margins in the final rounds, a no further action call in August can quietly decide who's standing on the podium in November. And here's the detail almost nobody connected. This exact interpretation, overlap without full axle advantage equals no case to answer, is now precedent. It's on the record, written down, which means the next driver who gets squeezed onto a white line with contact anywhere on this calendar can be told the exact same thing Piastri was told. Not, you were wrong, just no further action. So here's the verdict. This wasn't really about one corner at Les Combes. It was about the FIA quietly setting the exact width of the box every driver has to survive inside for the rest of the season, and choosing not to say so directly. Piastri didn't lose an argument about a black and white flag. He found out, in real time on camera, exactly how much space the sport's governing body is willing to let a driver take away from him, corner by corner, without consequence. And once that number is written into a steward's verdict, it doesn't go away. It gets used again. That's the part they didn't put in the press release. That's the part you now know. Agree or disagree, the comments are the courtroom on this one. Tell me straight, was Piastri right to call this out? Or is he just looking for someone else to blame for a racing incident? And if this story isn't over, and it isn't, because this exact rule is going to get tested again before the season's out. Hit subscribe now so you're here when it does. Until the next one.